Sociology Capstone project, we chose the subject of racism. In particular, we looked at Native Americans because when bringing up the subject of racism, not many people think of Native Americans. As people started migrating from the Fertile Crescent, which is located in Iran and Jerusalem area, many people either went to Europe or to Asia. Not many people traveled north in fear of the harsh winters and not surviving. Those that did travel north went through Russia and down through Alaska into the Americas. Columbus first landed on a Caribbean island in 1492, where he enslaved 6 Native Americans. Native Americans were used by early colonists and were enslaved by other Native American tribes and sold to colonists during battles encountered with one another. However, Native Americans knew the land better than early colonists did, so they often evaded. Sometimes they evaded and came back with their tribe to seek revenge on colonists that enslaved them. Within a few generations, approximately 95%, or 20 million, Native Americans were extinguished because of smallpox disease that early Europeans and colonists brought over from Europe. The natives sided and fought with the French in the 7 Years' War that started in 1756. There are also other numerous battles fought between colonists and Native Americans. The Native American defeat in the Battle of Horseshoe Bend caused natives to hand over 20 million acres of land to the federal government. The Indian Removal Act divided land west of the Mississippi for those defeated in this war. The Trail of Tears forced Indians to move to these new territories by foot and often in chains. Disease and starvation led to the death of thousands on the way. The first reservations were created in 1951, but didn't allow the Native Americans to live the hunter-gatherer life that they were used to. Instead, they were forced to learn farming, and since they were unsuccessful, many died of starvation. There is no federal laws on Native American or Indian reservations today. However, a lot of them seek federal government financial aid, and they also get their money from tourism and from casinos. Despite all of this funding, reservation life is still like a third world country, and many people live in overcrowded houses. It wasn't until 1968 that Native Americans were granted all of their rights that were granted by the Constitution and the amendments.
Hey, how's it going? Today I'm going to talk about political issues on Native Americans. Native Americans were legally named citizens but didn't have the right to vote until 1948, but it took 14 additional years for every state to get on board, with Utah being the last state. Many Native Americans don't have traditional street addresses on reservations, which caused many states to reject voter registration applications. Even when they are all registered, they still may not be able to vote because many states don't accept tribal IDs as a valid form of ID at the polls. Polling sites are another big problem. In South Dakota, 32% of the Native Americans didn't vote because the distance of travel to go vote affected their choice of not voting. Some Native Americans across the country have to drive up to about 150 miles just to vote. Currently at the state and federal level that can help this debate so that Native Americans can exercise their right to vote more easily and fairly. Now I'm going to talk about other political issues. Since many of the Native American lands are held in trust by the government, Native Americans can't get loans to set up businesses. Approximately 56.2 million acres under the trust of federal government. Some reservations hold natural resources that outside business owners want to extract, which leads to climate change and affecting resources that Native Americans rely on, such as rainwater, animals, and wood for fires. Many Native Americans rely on federal aid for schooling. The Johnson O'Malley program disperses these funds based on the number of tribal members attending public school. Despite of the population of the Native students growing by 4% since 1995. An official survey hasn't been done since 1995. This has led to a decrease of funding for the Native students by half. Federal funding marked for Native student enhancement is getting misused and is being used for student body of the school as a whole instead of towards Native specifically. The audits conducted are not conducted thoroughly, and the budgets are managed loosely by the public schools.
Today's population has about 6.79 million Native Americans, which is about 2.9% of the U.S. population, with most of it being the Midwest, and North Carolina. There are many problems that the Native Americans who stay in the U.S. face in our culture, and these are a couple we found in our research. Native Americans today face 27% of poverty and are still trying to reverse some of the lasting effects of federal policies that have put them at a disadvantage for hundreds of years. Adding to this, Native American teens have low high school graduation rates, which are another key factor that is keeping them trapped in poverty, says Anna Rose, the director of the Indian Education Department of the Minneapolis Public School District. This is due to how they're treated in school, academic needs that are not met, poor equipment of schools, and from lack of federal funding. The American Indians have the lowest average in the USA. This leads back to the graduation problem because if they don't get the proper education while they're in school, then how are they expected to succeed in the real world? Out of all ethnic groups in the US, the American Indians have the highest rate of school dropouts, about 54%, highest rate of child mortality, highest rate of suicide, and also highest rate of teenage suicide, which is 18.5 per 100,000. Highest rate of teenage pregnancy, lowest life expectancy, which is 55 years, and poor health care of them has led to high obesity, diabetes, HIV/AIDS. All these negative social effects have led to many alcoholic and suicidal amongst Native Americans. With the Native Americans who are staying on reservations, the houses are beyond capacity due to the high poverty rate, causing upward of 90,000 to be underhoused or homeless. Some of them can't even vote due to no poll units near reservations or rejected voting cards due to not using traditional street addresses, which we take for granted in the United States. Due to the black maltreatment within the justice system, Native American maltreatment has gone unreported for the most part. If things continue going the way they are, the Native language could go extinct without any intervention by 2050. Our culture doesn't really speak on Native Americans because we know nothing about it. In school, we are taught the bare minimum about them and the role play we played in forcing them to move from their homes. The fact that teams like Washington Redskins, Atlanta Braves, Kansas City Chiefs still have these names and mascots shows where we are as a culture. Ways that we can fix this is bringing more attention to what's happening to them and try educating people on the current struggle that they are going through and have been going through. We're so stuck in our ways that some people don't see a problem with what's being done to them. We need to open our eyes and see what's really happening out there.
Talking about statistics, what culture do you think has the highest suicide rate?
African Americans.
Who in our culture is the most discriminated against, and why do you believe that?
African Americans are the most discriminated against because it's just history. That's how it's always been.
Do you know any history about the Native Americans?
Yes, Christopher Columbus came to the country and he basically did what the whites did to the blacks.
On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not at all, 10 being an abundance of information, how much have you learned about Native Americans in grade school?
I would say like 4.
Talking about statistics, what culture do you believe has the highest suicide rate?
I'm not really sure. I think it's pretty high. When I think of culture, I think of, I know it's really high in the United States of America. I've heard some parts of Scandinavia, it's quite high as well. Yeah.
What do you know about Native Americans?
A good amount. I have family that originates from the Seminole tribe down in Florida. So I had a chance to learn a little bit about them, and then growing up in Virginia, I got to learn quite a bit about early settlers, and just on my own curiosities, explored Native American culture extensively.
On a scale of 1 to 10, back in grade school, how much do you think that you learned about Native Americans?
That's a good question. I would say I grew up in Fairfax County Public Schools, which is a pretty good school system. I want to say it probably made up maybe a sixth of what we covered in elementary school.